Northwatch sat under a sky that never looked fully safe, even on clear days, because its tall walls, black towers, and narrow bridges were built against old storms and worse fears. The city lived from windmills, forge smoke, and river trade, and its people trusted stone more than hope. Mira knew that better than anyone because she was a young gravity mage who worked with city guards during the day and studied pressure lines at night. She was small, quiet, and stubborn, with black hair tied back in a simple braid, and she wanted one thing more than anything else: to keep Northwatch steady so no one had to feel the fear she had felt as a child. But on the night the problem began, that simple dream cracked wide open because a void storm was moving over the city and everyone could see it. The storm was not just dark clouds. It was a moving tear in the sky, full of cold black light, and it was turning normal elemental magic into unstable phantoms that could not stay in one shape. Fire flickered into ghost hands. Ice formed into half-seen soldiers. Wind twisted into empty voices. If the storm reached the city center, it would erase streets, homes, memories, and maybe even the souls of the people inside them. Mira saw the first warning when the market square bent upward like it was made of cloth, and she knew this was not a drill, not a bad omen, and not a problem for later. This was the kind of threat that could swallow a city while people still argued about who was in charge. Mira ran toward the central bell tower where the city council had gathered with worried faces and shaking hands. There she found Councillor Brent, an older man with gray hair and a heavy coat, who wanted to keep order even when his voice trembled. She also found Sergeant Ivy, a sharp-eyed woman with red hair and a steel belt who wanted to protect the streets and the people on them. Both of them mattered because one controlled the alarms and the other controlled the guards, but neither of them understood what the storm really was. A scholar named Nolan, a thin man with brown hair and ink-stained sleeves, explained the truth in a voice that kept breaking as he spoke. Long ago, Northwatch had sealed a deep wound under the city, a hollow place where magic could fall apart. Now that wound was opening again, and the storm was feeding on every spell it touched. Nora, a healer with blonde hair and tired eyes, listened from the back of the hall and whispered that if the storm kept growing, the hospitals would be full of people lost to phantom sickness, a state where a person could still breathe but no longer feel fully real. The council wanted to close the gates and wait for the storm to pass, but Mira understood the terrible truth first. Waiting would not save anyone. The storm was moving toward the heart of Northwatch, and something inside it was calling to her gravity sense like a hook in her chest. She followed that pull down into the old underways beneath the city, where cracked pipes and forgotten prisons lay under thick stone, and there she found the first impossible answer to the crisis. In a chain chamber lit by red torchlight, a fire beast was struggling against iron bands that had been fixed into the walls years before. His name was Ash, a huge male creature with ember-red hair like a burning mane, broad shoulders, glowing orange eyes, and scorched markings across his arms and chest. He was not a mindless monster, as the city had always claimed. He was a guardian spirit of fire, bound after an old battle because the rulers feared what he might choose if he were free. Ash wanted one thing above all else: freedom, but he also wanted respect because he had been used as a weapon and then locked away when the war ended. Mira felt the heat rolling off him and nearly stepped back, yet she also saw fear in his eyes, and fear made the truth clear. The void storm was not only breaking magic outside, it was pulling on old seals inside the city, and Ash was one of those seals. Then a second presence rose out of the cold wall beside him, and the air turned sharp enough to hurt. A phantom ice general appeared, full of pale light and old discipline, with a female body, white hair, and armor that looked half solid and half mist. Her name was General Frost, and she had once led the city defenses in the war that created the prison below. She was dead in body but not gone in spirit, trapped between memory and purpose. She wanted to hold her soldiers together even now because she believed Northwatch still needed structure and duty. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a battlefield. She told Mira that the storm was making phantom copies of every strong emotion it touched, and those copies would grow wild unless someone anchored them. Mira did not fully understand, but she understood enough to know the city was in greater danger than anyone thought. Before she could ask more, a hidden door opened with a soft click, and a third figure stepped through, making every guard outside the chamber raise their weapons in horror. His name was Victor Vale, a forbidden blood mage with male features, dark brown hair, and a long coat stained by old ritual marks. He wanted power, or so everyone believed, because blood magic was banned after people blamed it for past disasters. But Victor did not come to destroy Northwatch. He came because the storm had already taken something from him years before, his family line, his freedom, and his place in the city, and he had spent years studying the void in secret so he could stop it before it erased more people. He told Mira that the void storm did not come from nature. It came from a living hunger beneath the city, a force that fed on unbound magic and weak wills. To stop it, he said, they needed a gravity mage who could hold broken forces in place long enough for a true seal to form. Mira realized with a shock that made her stomach tighten that Victor had been waiting for her specifically because her power could do something no one else could. She could not just push and pull matter, she could anchor the shape of a soul itself. The alliance they formed was ugly, risky, and necessary, and every step made the danger worse. Mira freed Ash from one chain, but not all of them. Because too much fire in one place could collapse the tunnel and kill them all. Ash agreed to help only because he wanted to burn the void before it swallowed the city. And because Mira spoke to him as a person instead of a weapon. General Frost moved beside them like a cold shadow, guiding them through the old defense tunnels with perfect memory. While Victor used forbidden blood sigils to reveal the places where the storm was cracking the city from below. Together they reached the old well at the center of Northwatch, where the seal had once been made. Above them, the sky had split into jagged black seams and phantom creatures were pouring through the cracks. One by one, the city's normal elements failed. Water turned to glassy hands, stone shivered and forgot its shape, lamps flickered into empty blue flames. Mira used her gravity power to hold a collapsing bridge. And for one breath she thought she had done enough. Then the void answered. A huge silent wave rolled down from The Chinese letter sky, and every phantom in sight bent toward it as if called home. The council guards broke formation. Sergeant Ivy tried to hold the line. Counselor Brent ordered the gates sealed. Nora pulled frightened civilians toward shelter, but the storm was too strong, and the city began to lose itself in pieces. Mira saw a child staring at a wall that was no longer a wall, just a hole in memory. And she understood that the true battle was not against fire or ice or blood, it was against being erased. Victor shouted that the seal could only be rebuilt if someone carried the storm long enough to be marked by it. Ash offered his fire. General Frost offered her last binding command, but Mira felt the answer inside her chest. Quiet and clear, she stepped into the center of the broken well, spread her hands, and stopped trying to crush the storm with force. Instead, she reached for every frightened soul around her, every memory, every heartbeat. And she anchored them one by one. The air changed, the phantoms slowed, the void pushed back, confused by a power it could not swallow. Mira was not breaking the storm, she was giving reality a place to stand. The final clash was not loud in the way people expected. It was bigger than sound. The void form above the well shivered as Mira held the city together through raw will and trembling breath, while Ash poured controlled fire into the broken edges of the seal. General Frost shaped the fire into cold lines that could not scatter, and Victor used his blood magic not to wound, but to draw living circles that locked the new pattern in place. The hungry force under the city took shape at last, not as a person, but as a vast, empty hunger that had learned how to mimic magic in order to spread. It tried to pull Mira apart with fear, showing her fake images of Northwatch falling and her own hands failing. She almost bent under that pressure because she had always believed strength meant control. But then she remembered the people above, and she remembered how each ally had trusted her in the one way that mattered. Ash had trusted her with his chains, Frost had trusted her with duty, Victor had trusted her with a secret that could have ruined him. Mira understood then that trust was also a kind of gravity. It held things together when force alone could not. She changed her spell in the middle of the storm, not pushing harder but widening her anchor until it covered the city core. The void screamed without sound and pulled back. The phantom waves broke apart, the sky above Northwatch sealed into one cracked but stable whole. When the light settled, the city still stood, though tired, scarred, and trembling. The people in the streets slowly remembered their names, their homes, and one another. Ash remained free, though still bound by a choice to stay. General Frost faded from a full body into a steady guardian presence in the walls below. Victor survived the risk of his forbidden art, but now he had a place in the city he had once been forced to leave. Mira stood at the center of the well, shaking, changed, and finally certain that her gift was never meant to crush the world. It was meant to hold it when everything else came apart. And high above Northwatch, where the broken sky still carried a dark stain, something in the void noticed that she had learned how to answer back, which meant the story was not over yet. Northwatch still stood under the broken sky, but it no longer felt like a safe city. The black towers cast long shadows across narrow bridges, and the glowing market lanterns trembled as if the wind itself was afraid. High above the city, the void storm churned in black and violet layers, with strange cracks moving through it like broken glass. The people of Northwatch knew the danger now, and that knowledge made every sound feel sharper, every step feel heavier, and every face look more worried. Mira knew the truth better than anyone else. The storm was not only pressing on the city walls, it was searching. It had noticed her, and that meant the fight had become personal. She was a young woman with black hair in a simple braid, a dark blue mage coat with silver trim, fitted gray gloves, a leather belt with rune pouches, and sturdy black boots. She had calm eyes, but now her calm looked hard-earned because she had learned that her gift was not made to destroy. It was made to hold. That truth mattered because the city was failing in slow ways, and if the storm broke through before anyone understood how to stop it, Northwatch would be overwhelmed from above and below. Counselor Brent, an older man with gray hair, round glasses, and a heavy dark coat, moved through the council hall with a worried but steady face. He wanted order because the city needed it, and he knew that fear could spread faster than any crack in a wall. Sergeant Ivy, a sharp-eyed woman with red hair tied in a tight ponytail, stood beside the guards in a steel-gray uniform and polished boots, ready to protect the people even when the plan was not clear. Nolan, a thin man with brown hair and ink-stained sleeves, carried storm charts and old notes with shaking hands, because he had spent years studying the sky and still could not explain why the void was bending space around the city. Nora, a gentle woman with blonde hair in a loose bun and a pale healer robe, watched them all with tired eyes, because she knew that people would break under fear long before their bodies failed. They were all important now because the city could not be saved by one person alone. It needed trust, and trust was the one thing Northwatch had almost lost. Victor Vale stood apart from the council table, and his presence changed the air in the room. He was a thin man with dark brown hair, sharp facial features, a long black coat marked with faint red ritual lines, pale hands, and a guarded, intelligent expression. He had once been forced out of Northwatch because people feared his forbidden blood magic, and that fear had never fully disappeared. Some in the room looked at him as if he were a tool, while others looked at him as if he were a trap. Yet Victor had come back because he knew what the others did not. He had seen signs of the storm long before it fully opened, and he understood that the void was not random. It was being guided by a hidden pattern, one that responded to living magic. That was why he had risked his forbidden art before, and that was why he had returned now. He wanted a place in the city, but not for pride. He wanted one chance to prove that his knowledge could save people instead of scaring them. He spread his notes across the table and pointed to the moving cracks in Nolan's charts. He explained that the storm was feeding on fear, memory, and unsteady magic, then turning those things into pressure points in the sky. If those pressure points linked together, the storm would open a path deep enough to crush the city by force and by panic. The council room grew quiet when he said that the storm was learning. It was not just surrounding Northwatch, it was studying the people inside it. Mira felt her stomach tighten because she realized that the thing watching above the clouds was not a mindless disaster. It had a will, and wills could be challenged, resisted, and sometimes outsmarted. Before the council could decide what to do, the city shuddered. A low wave of dark force rolled across the windows, and every lantern in the room flickered at once. Outside, a section of the old underways began to crack, and people shouted as loose stone fell into the deep passage below. Sergeant Ivy rushed to the door and ordered the guards to move the crowd away from the bridges. Counselor Brent sent runners in every direction, telling them to keep the market calm and open the shelters. Nolan looked at his charts and then at the sky, and his face went pale when he saw the pattern align with a new pull in the storm. Mira felt the shift in her own body before anyone else spoke. The same strange pressure that had answered her in the well now returned, stronger and clearer, like a hand reaching down through black water. She closed her eyes, steadied her breath, and listened. For the first time, she did not push her power away. She let it settle. She felt the storm pressing for weakness, but she also felt the shape inside it, like a locked door hidden in thunder. That was the turning point for her. She understood that her gift was not a weapon that exploded outward. It was a force that could catch what was falling. She moved toward the underways with Ivy, Victor, Nolan, and Nora close behind, while Brent stayed above to hold the city together. The deeper tunnels were cold and wet, lit by faint blue lamps, and every step echoed with danger. There they found the first true sign that the storm had reached inside the city. Old wall marks had opened into thin black seams, and the seams pulsed whenever people near them panicked. Victor knelt beside one of the seams and pressed his pale hand close without touching it. He said the storm was linked to blood because blood carried memory and memory gave the void a path. Mira finally understood the terrible part of his warning. The storm was not hunting stone alone. It was feeding on the living fear of everyone in Northwatch. Then the second revelation came, and it changed everything. In the oldest chamber below the city, hidden behind a sealed arch, they found a stone circle carved with the same patterns that Nolan had seen in the sky. Nora brushed away dust from the center of the room and uncovered a broken emblem of the old city founders. It showed that Northwatch had faced something like this before. The void had not appeared by accident. Long ago, the city elders had trapped an earlier fragment of the same storm beneath the foundations, and they had built the city on top of that sealed wound. The seal had held for years because a line of trained holders kept reinforcing it, not with force but with balance. Mira felt her chest tighten again as the truth settled in. Her gift was not new. She was part of an old duty that the city had forgotten. The people who came before her had learned that the storm could only be held by someone who accepted its pressure without letting it control them. That was why her power had awakened in the well. It was answering an old call. Victor looked at the seal and made a hard admission. He had not returned only to help. He had come because his own forbidden studies had uncovered the same buried truth, and he believed the storm would soon break the old seal unless a living holder stepped in and took its place. That meant Mira had been chosen by the city long before she understood herself. The twist hit her harder than any blast of force because it meant her strange gift was never a mistake. It was a responsibility passed through forgotten hands. Yet the seal was failing now, and if it collapsed before they could restore it, the storm above would rush down into the city and tear through every bridge, hall, and home. Mira did not run from that truth. She stepped forward. That was the change in her, and everyone saw it. The young woman who once feared her own power now stood in the center of the sealed chamber and told the others to trust her. Victor, for the first time, lowered his guarded stare and gave her the full truth of his method. His blood magic could not destroy the storm, but it could map its living edges and reveal where the pressure would strike next. He warned them that the ritual would be dangerous, not because it would hurt them, but because it would force the storm to notice them all at once. General Frost answered that warning. She appeared at the chamber edge as a female phantom with white hair, pale blue glowing skin, and silver armor that looked half solid and half mist. Her cold, disciplined expression never changed, and her voice sounded like winter stone. She said the storm had also awakened old guardians, and she had come because the balance of the seal mattered more than pride or fear. Ash, a huge male fire beast with ember-red hair like a burning mane, glowing orange eyes, broad muscular arms, scorched markings, and heavy iron chains around his wrists and chest, was brought forward by the guards because the chains around him had begun to warm whenever the storm pulsed. He looked fierce and wounded, but he did not fight when Mira approached. He wanted only one thing, freedom from the force that had bound him, and used his rage. Nora, seeing his pain, promised to keep him steady. Sergeant Ivy placed her hand on her weapon and her other hand on the chamber wall, ready for anything. Counselor Brent arrived below despite the danger, because he knew a leader had to stand where fear was strongest. He looked at Mira and said the city would follow if she led. Then the ritual began. Victor traced red lines in the air with pale fingers. Nolan called out the storm angles from his charts. Nora grounded the chamber with healing raps and steady words. Ivy held the line at the door. Brent spoke the city oath, and General Frost froze the seal marks in perfect shape so they would not split too soon. Mira stood at the center and opened her hands. The pressure of the storm slammed down through the city, through the chamber, and through her chest, but she did not break. She held it. Above them, far beyond the cracked sky, the void storm shifted and turned. It had noticed her answer. The cracks in the darkness widened like eyes opening, and the whole city seemed to go silent. Mira felt the storm looking back, and she understood that this was only the first exchange. She had made herself known, and now the thing in the void was coming to learn what she really was. The chamber lights trembled, the old seal groaned, and Victor shouted for everyone to brace because the next strike was already forming overhead. Mira kept holding, even as the darkness pressed harder, and in that moment the city of Northwatch waited on the edge of a choice that would decide everything next. Northwatch still stood under a broken sky, and the whole city seemed to hold its breath. Black towers leaned into the wind, narrow bridges shivered above dark streets, and lantern light wavered across wet stone. Deep below the central chamber, the old seal pulsed with a tired gold glow, while the void storm pressed against it from above like a living wound in the air. Mira stood at the center of that pressure, a young woman with black hair and a simple braid, calm eyes, a dark blue mage coat with silver trim, fitted gray gloves, a belt of rune pouches, and steady boots planted wide on the floor. She had come here to protect Northwatch, but now she understood the truth clearly. The storm was not only trying to break the seal, it was trying to look back at her, learn her shape, and find the reason she could answer it. That made her the center of the danger, and if she failed now, the city would not only lose its defense, it would lose its chance to stand at all. Victor Vale stood just behind her, and he looked as sharp and dangerous as a blade kept in a dark room. He was a forbidden blood mage with dark brown hair, pale hands, a long black coat marked by faint red ritual lines, and an intelligent face that almost never showed fear. Victor wanted control, but not for greed alone. He had spent years studying old magic that most people feared, because he believed power had to be understood before it could be survived. He knew the Void Storm was not a simple disaster, and he had warned the city that something older than weather had opened above them. Counselor Brent, an older man with gray hair, round glasses, and a heavy dark coat, stood with him and tried to hold the room together with a steady voice. Brent wanted order because he carried the burden of every life in Northwatch, and he knew panic could shatter the city faster than any wall. Sergeant Ivy, a sharp-eyed woman with red hair and a tight ponytail, a steel-gray guard uniform, and polished boots, braced herself near the chamber steps. She wanted action, not speeches, because her duty was to keep people alive when fear made them freeze. Nolan, a thin scholar with brown hair, ink-stained sleeves, a worn coat, and nervous hands, clutched storm charts and old notes. He wanted an answer that his careful studies could prove, because he had seen signs in the sky for months and feared nobody had listened soon enough. Nora, a gentle healer with blonde hair in a loose bun, a pale robe, cloth wraps on her arms, and tired eyes, moved between them and checked every injured hand and shaking face. She wanted to keep people standing because she knew a frightened city could not heal itself while the threat still hovered above it. Then the next strike began to form overhead. At first it was only a deep vibration in the stone, but then the ceiling of the chamber dimmed, and a spiral of black and violet light gathered in the opening above the seal. The void storm twisted there, full of broken light, unstable phantom magic, and strange cracks that bent the air around them. The chamber lights trembled harder, dust fell from the high beams. The seal gave a long groan that sounded like an old door being forced open by a giant hand. Victor lifted one arm and shouted for everyone to brace because he could see the shape of the strike before anyone else could. His voice cut through the chamber, and Ivy snapped orders to the guards while Brent demanded the lower doors be locked. Mira did not move away from the seal. She tightened her fingers, drew a slow breath, and pushed her magic forward with all the calm she could find. The storm answered at once. A cold pressure rolled down through the chamber, and for one terrible moment it felt as if the sky itself had reached down to touch her mind. She saw flashes inside the darkness, not images of war or fire, but fragments of a place with no floor, no sun, and no clear edge. In that empty space, something vast and patient seemed to wait. It was not blind. It was studying her. Mira felt the fear rise, but she also felt something else, something quieter. The storm was not attacking with rage alone. It was hunting a key, and she had somehow become the lock. The strike hit like a hammer made of night. The seal flared, the chamber shook, and everyone slid back a step as the force rolled through the room. Ivy caught herself against a stone rail and held her guard line steady. Brent nearly lost his footing, but he kept his balance and stayed in front of the others, because a leader cannot hide when people are watching. Nolan dropped to one knee, his charts scattering across the floor, and Nora rushed to help him before the wind could pull his notes away. Victor planted both hands in the air and threw a ring of red magic around the seal, not to attack the storm, but to slow the shock and keep the chamber from breaking apart. He had chosen a forbidden path for a reason. Long ago he had studied a sealed record that said the void storm would not destroy the city by force alone. It would first find a person who could hear it, then use that person to widen the breach from inside. That was why Mira mattered so much, and that was why Victor had brought her here even when others feared her power. He had believed only a living answer could resist a living storm. Now the truth showed itself in the room. The storm was testing Mira, not merely trying to crush her. If she answered the wrong way, it could use her spark to tear the seal wide open. If she answered the right way, it might be driven back for a time, but only if she understood what her power was meant to do. Mira felt the weight of that choice settle on her shoulders, and for a moment she thought of the city above. She thought of the lanterns on the bridges, the children in the upper districts, the market stalls in the narrow streets, and the old workers in the underways who had no way to run if the sky came apart. She thought of every person who trusted the walls of Northwatch to hold. Then she looked at Victor, at Brent, at Ivy, at Nolan, and at Nora, and she saw that they were all waiting on her not because she was the strongest, but because she had been willing to stay when fear told her to step back. That changed something inside her. Up to now, she had been trying to survive the storm. Now she understood she had to face it as if she belonged in the same place as its anger. She lowered her stance, set both hands over the seal, and let her magic flow in a cleaner line than before. The rune pouches at her belt gave a soft hum, and the silver trim on her coat caught the chamber light. The pressure above her shifted. The darkness did not retreat, but it paused, as if startled that she had not yielded. Then, from the far side of the chamber, a second presence moved in the storm. A pale shape formed out of frost and mist, and a woman stepped out of the cold with white hair, silver armor, pale blue glowing skin, and the severe face of a battlefield commander. General Frost had arrived, and her expression made one fact clear at once. She was not here to help lightly. She had come because the storm was connected to an old pact, and she knew more about the seal than she had ever told the city. That revelation changed the room at once, because now the danger was not only overhead, it was also standing inside the chamber with them. General Frost spoke in a voice as cold and controlled as winter stone. She said the seal had been built not just to keep something out, but to keep something in. The city of Northwatch had been built around a forgotten prison, and the void storm had formed when that prison began to fail. Victor stared at her with hard eyes because he had suspected a hidden chamber under the city, but not the full truth. Brent looked stunned because every plan he had made for the city had rested on a lie of comfort, and now that lie had cracked wide open. Nora and Nalan both understood the danger at once. If the prison failed completely, then the storm above would no longer remain a storm. It would spill through the city in waves of unstable phantom force, overwhelm the walls, and scatter every ward the city had left. General Frost admitted her own role as well. She had once helped guard the prison, but when the old council chose silence over honesty, she had been bound to watch from the edges until the seal weakened enough for her to return. Her motive was now clear. She was not a stranger appearing by chance. She had come because the old duty of the prison had awakened again, and because Mira had become the first person in generations who might speak to the storm without being erased by it. That truth struck Mira harder than the strike itself. She had thought she was only reacting to danger, but now she saw that the city, the seal, Victor, and even the storm itself had all been pulling toward this moment for a long time. The room grew tense as General Frost raised a hand and warned that the storm would soon use a second path. If the seal could not be stabilized from above, then the prison below would open instead, and the city would face a deeper breach in its underways. Ivy immediately called for guards to secure the lower routes. Brent ordered every gate in the chamber network sealed until they knew more. Nolan gathered his scattered notes and found a page he had marked weeks before, a map of the old tunnels that matched the shape of the chamber floor. His face went pale when he realized the storm pattern and the tunnel lines formed the same symbol. Nora turned toward Mira and told her in a soft but firm voice that fear was not the same as failure, and that Mira did not have to carry the whole city alone. Victor gave Mira one more hard look, and then he made his own choice. He admitted that the bloodlines in his magic had once been used to control the prison wards, not to destroy them. He had hidden that fact because he feared the city would use it the wrong way. That was the final piece of the puzzle. Victor was not only a dangerous mage, he was also a keeper of broken methods that might still save Northwatch if he stopped hiding and started trusting the others. Above them, the void storm answered with a deep, low roar that shook the chamber lights again. The black and violet Chinese letter, no, the dark pressure spread wider. And the cracks in the air began to twist toward the floor. Mira felt the pull at once, and she knew the next moment would decide whether the city bent or held. She stood with her black braid resting against her coat, her gloved hands steady, and her eyes fixed on the pulsing seal. General Frost took position beside her. Victor raised his hands and began tracing old red patterns in the air. Brent called the council order into the lower halls. Ivy drove the guards toward the tunnel stairs. Nolan spread his charts on the stone and shouted the route that matched the prison line. Nora moved among them with calm urgency, giving strength where fear was draining it away. The chamber became a single moving body, each person taking a role in the same desperate plan. For the first time since the storm began, Mira was not only holding the line, she was leading it. And as the dark force above her gathered for one more strike, she finally understood that the real battle was not just to survive the storm. It was to decide what kind of power her own heart would become, and that choice had only just begun. High above Northwatch, the void storm churned like a broken wound in the sky, and its black and violet clouds flashed with cracked light. The city below still shone with a few lanterns, but those lights now trembled inside narrow streets, under black towers, across the old bridges, and around the central bell tower where the last defenders gathered. Mira stood in the middle of that shaken chamber beneath the tower, her black braid resting over her dark blue mage coat, her gray gloves lifted, and her calm eyes fixed upward. She was young, but she was not alone anymore. Counselor Brent, an older man with gray hair and round glasses, had brought order to the frightened city for as long as he could. Sergeant Ivy, with her red ponytail and steel-gray guard uniform, had turned the guards into a hard shield. Nolan, thin and nervous with brown hair and ink-stained sleeves, held storm charts and old notes that might still reveal a way to survive. Nora, with her blonde hair in a loose bun and her pale healer robe, moved from one tired face to another, giving rest and courage with her soft voice. Ash, the huge fire beast with ember-red hair and glowing orange eyes, stood chained but furious, waiting for the moment his strength would matter. And at the edge of the chamber, General Frost, a phantom ice general with white hair and pale blue skin, watched with cold focus as if every moment was a military order. Everyone understood the danger now. If the storm struck again, the tower could crack, the city wards could fail, and the void storm could rip open the heart of Northwatch. Worse still, Victor Vale was somewhere in the broken dark above them, using forbidden blood magic to guide the storm toward the sealed chamber under the tower, because he believed that hidden power belonged to him. Victor did not want chaos for its own sake. He wanted control, and that made him more dangerous. Years ago, he had studied the old records of Northwatch and learned that the city was built over an ancient lock, one made to hold back phantom forces from the world beyond the storm line. Victor had been cast out when the council refused to let him open that lock. He believed the council was weak, the city was wasteful, and the old seal was only waiting to be claimed by someone brave enough to use it. The void storm had become his perfect tool because its unstable magic could crack the seal if fed enough force. That was why he had pulled the storm here, and that was why he kept attacking the tower. He wanted the power below Northwatch, and he wanted the city to kneel under the fear of the sky. The chamber shook again, and everyone braced, but Mira stepped forward before panic could spread. She looked at Brent, then at Ivy, then at Nolan and Nora, and finally at Ash, whose chains rattled with rising heat. She did not shout. She gave one clear order at a time, and the room moved with her. Brent sent runners to the lower halls. Ivy pulled the guards into the bridge lines. Nolan spread his charts across a stone table and pointed out the weak places in the ward circle. Nora gathered the injured and placed them near the inner wall where the healer light could reach them. Ash lowered his head, ready to break chains if the storm forced the last gate open. General Frost said little, but her pale armor shimmered as she formed thin shields of ice around the most fragile points. Mira felt the dark pressure above her press down like an angry hand, yet for the first time she did not flinch. She understood that fear was not the enemy. Loss of trust was the enemy. If she lost her hold on the people around her, the storm would win without needing another strike. So she breathed slowly, held her hands steady, and let the others see that she was still standing. That simple choice changed the whole chamber. The fear did not vanish, but it stopped spreading. It became focus. It became motion. It became a plan. And then the ceiling cracked with a sound like stone crying out, and a blade of violet lightning stabbed down through the fractured roof. The blast did not land cleanly. General Frost threw up a wall of ice mist. Ash surged against his chains and sent a wave of heat through the floor, breaking the force apart. Ivy dragged 2 guards back from the edge of a collapsing stair. Brent shielded a lantern cart with his body, keeping the light alive. Nolan, shaking but determined, called out the exact timing between the storm pulses, and Mira used that timing to weave a counter pattern with the runes on her gloves. The magic responded to her not because she forced it, but because she understood it. She was no longer trying to overpower the storm. She was listening to its rhythm. That was when the first revelation hit her. The void storm was not only random violence. It was being guided from above by blood magic, and its broken cracks were circling the chamber in a pattern that pointed straight to the sealed lock beneath Northwatch. Victor had not just attacked the city, he had mapped it. He had prepared every strike to drive the defenders away from the one place he wanted to reach. Mira saw the truth in the moving light, and she felt anger rise in her chest. Victor had been willing to endanger everyone just to prove his own right to rule what he did not understand. She stepped to the front line and told the others the truth in plain words. If they only blocked the storm, they would keep losing ground. If they protected the lower lock, they could force Victor to reveal himself. The city could not survive by hiding. It had to stand together and push back. Those words gave the chamber new life. Even the exhausted guards straightened. Even Nora lifted her head. Even Ash growled with approval, his ember mane brightening as if he understood courage better than language. Mira then led a bold move through the old underway passage beneath the chamber where the stones were damp, narrow, and lit by shaking wall lamps. Ivy went first, weapon ready. Brent followed, keeping the line organized. Nolan carried the charts close to his chest. Nora stayed near the wounded. General Frost moved like a silent winter shadow at the rear. Mira walked in the center, not because she needed protection, but because everyone needed to see where the path was going. And then the underways opened into a sealed chamber below the tower, and there, behind a circle of broken silver runes, Victor Vale finally waited. He was a man with dark brown hair, pale hands, and a long black coat marked with faint red ritual lines. His sharp face showed no panic, only hard focus, as if he had expected this moment all along. Around him, the void storm throbbed through cracks in the ceiling and floor, feeding from his blood magic and from the old seal below. Victor smiled when he saw Mira, but his eyes did not show joy. They showed hunger. He told her that Northwatch had wasted the lock for generations, hiding power from the world when it could have been used to remake it. He said the council feared change, the guards feared truth, and the people feared anyone strong enough to act. He claimed he was the only one brave enough to claim the storm and use it to build order from chaos. Mira almost answered with anger, but then she saw something worse than greed in his face. She saw belief. Victor truly thought he was saving the city from weakness. That made him harder to stop because he was not fighting for treasure. He was fighting for a future shaped by his own hand alone. Then he raised both pale hands, and the storm above them dropped another crushing surge. The chamber flashed black, violet, and white. Walls split. The rune circle shook. Nolan shouted that the seal was nearing collapse. Nora called for the injured to stay back. Ivy and the guards pushed forward, but the force of the storm threw them sideways. Ash roared and slammed his chained fists into the stone, sending a fiery shock through the floor that broke part of Victor's spell. General Frost spread her arms and froze the moving cracks for a moment, buying just enough time for Mira to act. Mira saw the real choice in front of her. She could try to destroy Victor by force, or she could do something harder. She could take control of the storm pattern itself. The answer came to her in a clear rush. The storm wanted motion, balance, and intent. It did not need a stronger fist, it needed a steadier heart. So she stepped into the center of the rune circle, raised her glowing hands, and began to guide the force instead of resisting it. The chamber shook harder than before, and for one terrible moment it seemed like everything would fail at once. Then the storm responded. The black light bent away from the seal. The violet cracks curled around Mira instead of around the city below. Victor stared in shock because he understood at once what she had done. She had become the center of the pattern, and she had taken his path away from him. And the battle did not end there, but the balance changed. Victor tried to force the storm back toward the seal, yet his control was no longer clean because Mira had broken the shape of his spell. Brent shouted for the guards to hold the outer ring. Ivy drove her people into place with fast, clear orders. Nolan found one final note in his storm charts and yelled that the west crack could be sealed if the timing matched the bell tower pulse above them. Nora reached the wounded and pulled them farther from the shaking wall. Ash, still chained, slammed heat into the stone again and forced a gap in the storm pressure. General Frost locked the broken air in a ring of cold, and for the first time her face showed something close to respect. Mira did not waste the moment. She used the bell pulse, the ice ring, the fire burst, and the ward lines together. One by one, the pieces clicked into place. The storm above the chamber began to fold inward instead of outward. Victor screamed that she did not understand what she was touching, but his voice had lost its calm edge. He was slipping. He had built his plan around control, and now control was leaving him. Mira looked at him and answered with steady words. She said power without trust always breaks the hand that holds it. She said a city was not a prize to be taken. It was a promise people made to one another. That was the second revelation, and it cut deeper than any blast. The storm had not simply found Mira by chance. The old seal had answered her because it recognized the will to protect, not the will to own. Victor saw that truth too late. His blood magic shattered in a bright red flare, and the void storm recoiled just enough for the chamber to survive. The ceiling above them still groaned. The full storm was not gone. Victor was not gone, but the first great clash had turned. The defenders were still standing, and now they knew the real fight was bigger than one battle. Mira lowered her hands slowly, exhausted but changed, and felt something new settle inside her. She was no longer the scared mage trying to survive the storm. She was the person the storm had chosen to test, and she had answered it with trust. Above them, the fractured sky still burned, and somewhere in the darkness Victor Vale was already planning his next move. Yet in the chamber below Northwatch, the people did not break apart. They gathered closer, spoke more quietly, and waited for Mira to lead them into whatever came next. For the first time, she did not fear that role. She carried it with both hands while the city held its breath around her, and the storm gathered strength for the next chapter of its war. Below the black towers of Northwatch, the chamber stayed dim and cold, while the fractured sky burned far above like a wound that would not close. The city outside was still alive with fear, but down here the people had begun to breathe as one group instead of many scattered hearts. Mira stood in the center of them, her black braid resting against the back of her dark blue mage coat, silver trim catching the weak lantern light. Her gray gloves were still stained with ash from the earlier clash, and her calm eyes moved from face to face as she listened. Counselor Brent, the older man with gray hair and round glasses, stood near the stone table with his heavy coat pulled tight, trying to hold the city together with tired words and steady hands. Sergeant Ivy, the sharp-eyed woman with red hair tied in a tight ponytail, kept her steel-gray guard uniform straight and her posture firm, because she wanted the people to see strength before they saw fear. Nolan, the thin scholar with brown hair and ink-stained sleeves, held storm charts and old notes against his chest, because he knew the sky was not random and because his warnings now mattered more than ever. Nora, the gentle healer with blonde hair and a loose bun, moved quietly among the wounded and tired, giving water and bandages with a face that was soft but serious. Every one of them knew the central problem now, and no one said it gently anymore. Victor Vale was still out there, the forbidden blood mage in the long black coat marked with faint red ritual lines, and he wanted the void storm for a reason that could break Northwatch from the inside. If he claimed the storm fully, the city walls would not matter, the towers would not matter, and every safe place below ground would turn into a trap. Mira understood that if they failed now, the city would either fall apart or be bent into something cruel and strange by the force in the sky. Yet even with that danger hanging over them, she did not step back. She stepped forward, raised one hand, and asked for the truth from everyone who still had a voice. Nolan was the first to speak because his fear was smaller than his need to be useful. He spread the storm charts on the table and showed how the cracks in the sky were not spreading at random. They were opening in a pattern that moved toward the oldest parts of Northwatch, especially the sealed underways beneath the central bell tower. He explained, in a thin and worried voice, that the void storm fed on old magic, old grief, and places where broken promises had been buried for too long. That meant Victor had not only attacked the city from outside, he had been guiding it toward a hidden point inside its own bones. Counselor Brent listened with his round glasses low on his nose, and his worried face slowly changed into one of grim understanding. Years ago, before the current panic, the council had locked away records about a lost chamber under the city. Those records spoke of a pact made by the first protectors of Northwatch, who used storm magic to seal something dangerous beneath the central tower. Brent had hidden the records because he feared panic, but now he saw that secrecy had helped Victor more than it had helped the people. That was the first twist of the night, and it landed hard. Victor was not simply trying to destroy Northwatch. He was trying to reach the sealed chamber below it, because he believed the chamber held the anchor stone that could shape the void storm into a tool. If he controlled that anchor, he could bend the fractured sky, command phantom magic, and force the city to open itself to his rule. Mira felt the room tighten around that truth. It was no longer a battle about walls and guards. It was a race into the heart of the city itself. Sergeant Ivy clenched her jaw and said that her guards would defend every stair and bridge they could hold, but she also admitted that the underways were too old and too narrow for a full defense. Nora added that many people were exhausted, shaken, and one sharp strike could send them into panic again. So Mira gave the order that changed the shape of the night. Ivy would secure the bell tower entrances, Brent would call trusted council workers to guide civilians to safer halls, Nolan would lead the way into the old charts and tunnels, and Nora would stay close to the wounded and the frightened so the city did not lose its courage while the fighting moved below. Mira herself would go into the underways with the smallest group, because the hidden chamber could only be reached by someone who could feel the storm through magic, and because she had already become the one everyone looked to when the world turned dark. No one argued, that silence meant trust. They moved before the sky could change its mind. Through narrow stone passages and old service halls, they descended into the underways where Northwatch had once stored grain, armor, and sealed relics from older wars. The air grew damp and stale, and the lantern light slid across walls marked with faded warning signs and half-erased symbols. Mira walked in front, her rune pouches resting against her belt, while Nolan followed close behind with his notes shaking in his hands. Sergeant Ivy kept to the rear with a guard squad of 4, each one chosen for discipline rather than pride. Brent remained above for the moment, sending runners and keeping the surface calm, and Nora helped the injured who could still move, because the city could not afford to leave anyone behind. As they reached a junction lined with cracked stone arches, the first sign of Victor Vale appeared. A thin ribbon of dark red magic crept across the floor like a living vein, and the temperature dropped so fast that even Ivy stopped and tightened her grip. Then a voice came from the dark, quiet and careful, as if the speaker had been waiting for them to arrive. It was Victor, and he stood half-hidden beyond the lantern glow, his sharp face calm, his brown hair falling across his forehead, and his pale hands folded as if he were a teacher about to correct a lesson. He did not rush them, he did not shout. He told Mira that Brent had lied, that the city had been built on fear, and that the sealed chamber below was not a prison at all. It was a lock, he said, and locks existed only because someone feared what truth might do in the wrong hands. He believed Northwatch had stolen power from the storm long ago and then buried the cost where ordinary people could not see it. He said he wanted the anchor stone not to destroy the city, but to stop the void storm from spreading across the land and swallowing every settlement that still stood beyond Northwatch. For the first time, Mira heard a motive that made painful sense. Victor was cruel, dangerous, and willing to use forbidden blood magic, but his fear was real. He believed the storm would not stop on its own, and he believed the council would rather hide the danger than face it. Yet before Mira could answer, Victor raised one hand, and the ribbon of red magic split into sharp lines that sealed the tunnel behind him. At the same time, phantom chill rolled in from the side passage, and General Frost appeared. General Frost was a female phantom in silver armor that looked half solid and half mist, with white hair and pale blue glowing skin, and she carried a cold discipline that made the tunnel feel smaller. Her expression never changed, but her presence told the others that Victor had not come alone and had not been planning only one move. She spoke in a low, clear voice and said that the storm had heard the old pact, and that the sealed chamber would open only if the right force met the right sorrow. Then she raised her mist arm, and a sharp wave of ice rushed through the underway, forcing the guards back and shattering one of the hanging lanterns. No one was hurt badly, but the shock was enough to scatter the group. Ivy pulled the guards into a defensive line, Nora dragged one stunned worker behind a stone support, and Nolan nearly dropped his charts before Mira caught his sleeve. In that single breath, the whole plan became a real fight. Victor wanted the anchor stone, but General Frost wanted the storm to obey ancient rules that no one fully understood. Mira saw the trap clearly then. Victor had not summoned Frost by mistake. He had learned that the Phantom General could reach deeper into the storm than any living mage, and he had used her order and discipline to force the path open. Yet Frost was not loyal in the way Victor expected. She turned her pale blue face toward the sealed door ahead and said the chamber had once belonged to the protectors, not to him. She had come because the pact was breaking, and if the anchor stone cracked, the void storm would split into many smaller storms that could tear apart the city and everything around it. That meant the stakes had risen again. The issue was not just who controlled the storm, it was whether the old seal could survive another push. Mira realized she needed more than power. She needed everyone standing with her, even the people who had once lied, and she needed the courage to trust what the city had hidden for too long. She looked at Victor, at Frost, at her own tired friends, and she made the hardest choice yet. She lowered her voice, told Ivy to hold the line, told Nolan to find the lock pattern in the charts, and told Nora to protect anyone who faltered. Then she stepped toward the sealed door and placed her gloved hand on the cold stone, while the underways shivered and the storm above the city answered in the darkness. The underground hall under Northwatch was cold, wide, and silent, and the air felt heavy with old stone and storm dust. Above it, the fractured sky kept flashing through the cracks in the ceiling, sending pale light over broken pillars, wet steps, and iron doors that had not opened in years. Mira stood at the sealed gate with her gloved hand pressed to the stone, and everyone around her knew the same thing at once. If the gate stayed closed, the city might hold together for one more night. If it opened the wrong way, the hidden power below could wake the void storm and tear Northwatch apart. That was the danger, and that was why Mira had lowered her voice and sent her friends to work. Ivy had to hold the line at the rear. Nolan had to find the lock pattern in the old charts. Nora had to keep anyone from falling when fear took their strength. And Victor Vale, standing in the dim behind the group, wanted the door open for his own reasons, because he believed the buried power could save him from the broken rules of blood magic that had trapped him for years. Mira did not look back at first. She felt the stone under her palm, and she felt a faint answer inside it, like a pulse under ice. She was a young woman with black hair in a simple braid, and her dark blue mage coat with silver trim looked almost black in the low light. Her calm eyes stayed fixed on the seal, but inside her chest, fear and hope fought each other hard. She had lied once before, and that lie had helped keep the city alive, but it had also kept the truth buried. Now she understood that the city had not been hiding a weapon. It had been hiding a lock, and the lock was made to hold back something that could use the storm above as a doorway. Counselor Brent, an older man with gray hair, round glasses, and a heavy dark coat, stepped closer with careful feet. He was a leader who wanted order more than praise, and his worried face showed how much the city depended on him. He spoke in a low, steady voice and asked Mira if she was sure. Mira answered yes, not because she was fearless, but because she had finally chosen trust over comfort. That choice mattered more than any spell she knew. Behind them, Sergeant Ivy stood like a wall. She was a sharp-eyed woman with red hair pulled into a tight ponytail, and her steel gray guard uniform made her look ready for a fight even while she waited in silence. She watched every shadow because she knew how quickly fear could become panic in a crowded tunnel. Nolan stood beside a stone table with his old notes and storm charts spread open in front of him. He was a thin man with brown hair, ink-stained sleeves, and a nervous face that always looked one step from apology. Yet he was the only one who had studied the city's old marking system closely enough to notice a pattern in the cracks of the seal. He leaned near the stone lines, traced the symbols with a shaking finger, and whispered that the lock was not random. It followed the rhythm of the storm itself. That meant the city had been built to answer the sky. Nora, a gentle woman with blonde hair in a loose bun and a pale healer robe, moved between the others with tired eyes and soft hands. She checked breathing, steadied shoulders, and spoke simple words to people who were close to breaking. Her job was not dramatic, but it mattered because fear spreads faster than injury. Without her, the tunnel would have become a place of collapse long before the gate opened. Victor Vale watched all of them with sharp patience. He was a forbidden blood mage, a man with dark brown hair, a long black coat marked with faint red ritual lines, and pale hands that never stayed still for long. He looked calm, but his mind worked like a knife under cloth. He wanted the door because he believed the hidden chamber held a source of power that could rewrite the rules of the spells that had made him an outcast. Long ago, the city elders had used forbidden methods to seal that chamber, then blamed outsiders and secret mages for every failure that followed. Victor had studied those lies for years, and he had decided that truth did not matter unless it gave power to the person strong enough to use it. He had not come to help Northwatch, he had come to claim what Northwatch had buried. That made him dangerous, but it also made him honest in one strange way, because he never pretended to be noble. General Frost hovered near the back of the hall as a female figure with white hair, pale blue glowing skin, and silver armor that was part solid and part mist. Her face remained cold and disciplined, like a commander carved from winter. She had followed the city only because the storm above had begun to twist the balance of spirit magic, and if the seal failed, her own frozen order could be swallowed by the wild chaos outside. Even Ash, the huge male fire beast with ember-red hair like a burning mane and glowing orange eyes, stood chained and tense near a wall of cracked stone. His heavy iron chains had been placed to keep his power from flaring in panic, but his wounded stare showed that he understood the danger better than most. He had once been used as a weapon, and now he wanted only to avoid being trapped in another ruin when the city fell. Nolan suddenly shouted that he had found the pattern. The lock was shaped like a 4-part storm wheel, and each part had to be matched to a line in the chart before the seal would answer. Mira turned toward him, and the moment changed at once. Ivy called for everyone to hold back while she and 2 guards pushed against a side door that began to rattle under the pressure of the void storm above. Nora moved to a young runner who stumbled and nearly fell, then caught him by the arm and guided him to a safe place beside the wall. Counselor Brent ordered the hall clear and told the remaining guards to keep their lanterns low so they would not blind Nolan while he worked. Then Victor did what Mira had feared he would do. He stepped toward the table, looked at the chart, and said he could make the seal open faster if someone would let him place his blood mark on the center stone. He explained it too calmly, and that calm made the threat worse because blood magic in Northwatch was not simply banned for pride. It had once been used to force old locks open too soon, and that mistake had allowed storm magic to leak into the lower streets for an entire season. People had suffered, supplies had failed, and whole blocks had been abandoned. Victor knew this history, but he also knew the city had blamed him for a different crime, one he had never committed. He was not asking to help by chance. He was trying to prove that only his way could work. Mira finally looked at him, and the silence between them felt hard enough to cut glass. She understood his motive now, and that made him more dangerous than any wild monster. He wanted control because he had lived without it for too long. He wanted respect because he had been denied it too often. But wanting something did not make it right. Mira raised her hand and told him to stand back. Victor smiled in a thin way that showed he did not like being refused, yet he did not move. Instead, the seal on the stone began to glow under Mira's hand, and the entire floor gave a slow, deep shiver. Everyone turned toward the door, the stone lines lit one by one, matching the storm wheel Nolan had found. Outside, the sky cracked with black and violet light, and the void storm bent across the high windows like a living wound. Then the first surprise hit the group hard. The gate did not open outward into a chamber. It opened inward into a long stair that should not have existed at all. The stair descended far below the underways, and on the wall beside it, carved in deep marks, were the names of the city founders. One of those names was Brent. The counselor froze, and the color drained from his face. He had not just known about the hidden seal. He had helped build it when he was much younger, and he had buried that fact to keep the city from turning the chamber into a race for power. He had lied for years, not to gain glory, but to keep Northwatch from tearing itself apart over the truths. That revelation changed everything in one breath. Brent admitted in a voice that barely held steady that the chamber below was not a vault of treasure. It was a prison built around the source of the void storm. Long ago, the city founders had opened a crack between the lower world and the sky by trying to use storm magic to make Northwatch stronger. Instead, the crack had grown into the violent storm overhead, and only the seal below kept it from widening further. If the stair led where he feared, then the chamber might still contain the anchor that held the sky together. But the anchor could not be touched carelessly. It had to be awakened in the right order, or the storm would pour down into the city in a single terrible surge. Mira felt the weight of that truth settle over her shoulders, and for the first time she understood why the city had hidden so much. It had not only been afraid of power, it had been afraid of its own mistakes. She looked at Victor again, and she saw that he had understood the same thing at the same instant. His ambition was still there, but now it had a harder edge. If he could reach the source first, he might use the crack for himself before anyone could stop him. Ash growled low in the back of his throat, chains clinking as the fire in his body answered the storm above. General Frost lifted one pale hand, and cold mist spread across the stone floor to slow the tremor, while Ivy shouted for the guards to form a line at the stair. The hall became a tight, dangerous place, with every heart beating too fast and every shadow stretching too long. Mira stepped to the top of the stair before anyone else could rush ahead. She felt the new air rising from below, and it carried the smell of wet rock, old metal, and storm lightning. She knew the next part would matter more than the last. If the chamber below held the anchor, then the city could still be saved. If it held only a broken power source, then Northwatch might become a doorway for the void storm itself. She turned her head just enough to see Nora helping a frightened guard sit down, Nolan clutching his charts with shaking hands, Ivy holding the line with a hard and steady stare, and Brent standing with both shame and resolve on his face. Even Victor, for all his dark intent, was watching the stare with a look of pure hunger and sharp calculation. Mira breathed once, deep and slow, and made herself steady. She had entered the underground with lies behind her. Now she stood at the edge of the truth, and the truth was larger, stranger, and more dangerous than she had imagined. Then she placed her foot on the first step, and the darkness below answered with a distant sound like a huge chain turning inside the earth, as the storm above Northwatch thundered again and the next secret began to wake. Northwatch still groaned under the storm, and the city felt like a giant stone cage waiting for a crack. Above the black towers, the sky tore with violet light, and the narrow bridges shook in the wind. Down in the lower streets, lanterns flickered behind rain-streaked windows, while the old underways waited below like the buried ribs of some sleeping beast. Mira stood at the first stone step with her black braid resting on her back, her dark blue mage coat damp at the hem, and her calm eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. She had come this far because the city was falling apart in pieces, and because Counselor Brent feared the storm was not natural at all. Brent was an older man with gray hair, round glasses, and a heavy dark coat, and he wanted only one thing now: to keep Northwatch from breaking open before the people understood what was happening. Sergeant Ivy, a sharp-eyed woman with red hair and a tight ponytail and a steel-gray guard uniform, had warned Mira that the lower tunnels were unsafe, but even Ivy had seen the fear in the guards. Nolan, a thin man with brown hair, ink-stained sleeves, and a worn scholar coat, had found storm charts that showed a strange pattern under the city. Nora, a gentle woman with blonde hair in a loose bun and a pale healer robe, had treated the injured workers who came up shaking from the vents near the old wells. All of them were different, but all of them were being pulled toward the same truth. Something deep below Northwatch was waking, and if it broke free, the storm above would not just frighten the city, it would ruin it. Mira took the next step, and the stone stair answered with that same deep chain sound, slow and heavy, as if the earth itself had shifted in its sleep. The air below was cold, wet, and stale, and each breath tasted like old metal. She moved with care, one hand near the rune pouches on her belt, the other ready beside her side. The torchlight from above faded fast, and the walls around her became rough black stone, cut long ago by hands that had wanted secrecy more than comfort. At the bottom of the stairs she found a landing with 3 paths, each marked by old symbols carved into the floor. One symbol showed a closed eye, one showed a broken ring, one showed a chain wrapped around a star. Mira did not know the full meaning yet, but she knew the message was clear. This place had once been important, and someone had spent years making sure it stayed hidden. Then a voice came from the dark behind her. It was low, calm, and cold with careful thought. Victor Vale stepped into the light with his long black coat and faint red ritual lines, his dark brown hair falling across a sharp face, his pale hands folded like a man making a polite offer. He was a forbidden blood mage, and he did not hide it. He wanted control, and he wanted it for a reason that sounded almost noble. He said the seal below Northwatch was failing, and if no one guided its power, the city would be swallowed by the storm and the phantom magic inside it. He claimed the council was too slow, the guards were too afraid, and the scholars were too blind. He said only someone willing to use forbidden methods could keep the city standing. Mira understood then why people feared him so much. He was not a laughing villain with no plan. He was a man who thought fear made him right. He believed the end could justify any method, even if the method poisoned everything it touched. Mira did not answer at once. She studied his face, his steady voice, and the tension in his hands. Then she noticed something else. Victor was not alone. A thin shimmer moved over the far wall, and General Frost emerged from the mist like a statue made of winter light. She was a female phantom general with white hair, pale blue glowing skin, and silver armor that looked half solid and half mist. Her face was cold, disciplined, and unreadable, and her eyes held the sharp focus of a commander who had fought long ago and had not forgotten the rules of war. She did not speak like a servant, and she did not move like one either. Instead, she looked at Victor with measured patience, as if she had agreed to stand beside him only for a single purpose. Mira realized the first twist then. Victor was not commanding the underworld alone. He had found an old force below the city, and that force was not fully his. General Frost was bound to the seal, and she served the old order that kept the buried power contained. Victor wanted to use her to stabilize the seal his own way, but Frost wanted something much stricter. She did not care about the comfort of the living city. She cared about discipline, restraint, and the old rules that had once locked the power away. That made the danger even worse. Two enemies could stand on the same side for one moment and still want very different futures. Mira felt that truth in her bones. She was not just trapped between a good choice and a bad one. She was trapped between two different kinds of control, and neither one fully trusted the people of Northwatch. Victor lifted one pale hand and showed her a small stone shard wrapped in red thread. He said it came from the chamber that held the source, and he said it had begun to pulse when the storm grew strongest. He explained that the underground was not empty. It held a sealed engine of phantom magic built long ago to gather storm power and keep the city safe, but then the builders lost control, and the whole system was locked beneath the city instead of destroyed. That was why the storm never left Northwatch. That was why the sky cracked above the towers every time the seal weakened. The city was built over a prison, and the prison had started to fail. Victor believed he could bind the force with blood magic, because blood magic listened to living power and could grip what ordinary spells could not. He spoke with such careful logic that Mira understood why some frightened people might follow him. If he was right, then he was trying to save the city in the only way he knew. But if he was wrong, his method would not just fail. It could wake the entire buried system at once. Mira thought of Brent, who kept the city organized while his hands trembled behind his back. She thought of Ivy, who stood firm even when she was afraid. She thought of Nolan, whose storm charts had shown the pattern before anyone else believed it. She thought of Nora, who kept helping people even when her own face looked tired. They were all working to protect Northwatch from the outside storm. Victor was trying to seize the storm from the inside. That difference mattered. It meant he was not trying to destroy the city for fun. He was trying to force it into safety, and that made him dangerous in a deeper way. Mira stepped toward the broken ring path, and General Frost vanished for a breath before reappearing ahead of her, blocking the way with a lifted hand. The air chilled around the Phantom General, and frost spread in thin lines across the stone. Mira raised her palm, not in attack but in warning. She told Victor that control built on fear always broke in the end. Victor answered that hope built on waiting often broke even faster. Then the ground shook again, harder this time, and the chain sound rolled up from below like a warning bell. A section of the ceiling cracked open, and a wave of dark wind rushed through the hallway. From far beneath them came a low roar, not from a beast, but from something vast turning inside a chamber too large to imagine. Mira saw it then in a flash of understanding. The seal was not only failing. It had been disturbed from the start. Someone had opened small hidden vents around the city, not to release the power but to test it. Victor glanced toward the side tunnel, and Mira caught the flicker in his eyes. He knew more than he had said. He had not started this disaster, but he had been feeding it, measuring it, waiting for the right moment to take command. That was the second revelation, and it cut deeper than the first. He was not the root of the problem, but he was helping it grow. Before Mira could press him further, a blast of phantom force swept through the corridor, and the stone floor split between them. Victor slid back with sharp control. General Frost lifted her silver arm to hold the chill wave in place, and Mira was forced to throw herself toward the side wall. Her shoulder hit hard stone, but she stayed on her feet. The passage ahead opened for one brief second, and in that brief second she saw a huge chamber below, lit by violet cracks and moving shadows. In the center hung a massive black and violet storm of unstable magic, folded into the shape of a torn sky, and around it stretched great chains made of light and iron. The void storm was not just above Northwatch, it was rooted under it, chained to the city itself. Then a new voice echoed from the far stair, and it was Sergeant Ivy, shouting for everyone to hold position. Behind her came Nolan with his storm charts clutched tight, and Nora with her healer wraps already ready for the wounded. They had followed Mira because she had sent a message too late to stop them, and because they no longer trusted the silence of the council. Brent arrived last, breathing hard, his round glasses slipping down his nose, but his steady face still trying to hold the group together. He looked once at Victor, once at Mira, and then down into the chamber below. For the first time, he understood that the city was not only under threat from a storm, it was standing on top of a sealed power that could be used, broken, or lost. Mira felt the weight of his silence and knew he was choosing what kind of leader he would become. Before anyone could speak again, the chains below gave one long, shuddering pull, and one of the violet cracks in the storm widened. A pulse of light flashed through the chamber, and every lantern in the tunnel went dark at once. In that blackness, General Frost spoke at last, her voice sharp as ice. She said the seal had been weakened by 3 keys, not one, and that one key still remained hidden somewhere inside Northwatch. Victor turned toward the deeper tunnel with a look of pure hunger and sharp calculation, and Mira breathed once, deep and slow, making herself steady. She had entered the underground with lies behind her. Now she stood at the edge of the truth, and the truth was larger, stranger, and more dangerous than she had imagined. She lifted her chin and stepped into the next shadow, while above them the storm thundered again and the last hidden key began to call. Northwatch sat under a torn sky, and the whole city felt trapped between thunder and stone. Black towers leaned against the wind, narrow bridges shook above glowing streets, and the old underways below them waited like a second city built from secrets. Far above, the void storm twisted in black and violet bands, and every flash of broken light reached down through cracks in the clouds. Mira knew what was at stake now. If Victor Vale found the last hidden key, he could unlock the sealed heart of Northwatch and pull power from the storm itself. If that happened, the city would not just shake. It could be open to something ancient, unstable, and impossible to control. Mira had come underground with lies in her mouth and fear in her chest, but she had also come with one clear hope: to keep the key away from Victor long enough to learn the truth. Victor moved ahead through the deeper tunnel with quiet confidence, his long black coat brushing the stone floor. The faint red ritual lines on his sleeves seemed to catch the dim light and drink it in. He was a forbidden blood mage, and the reason he mattered was simple. He knew the old rules of the city better than most, and he believed those rules had trapped him and everyone else for too long. He did not want the key only for greed, even if greed lived in him. He wanted control, because he believed control was the only thing that could save Northwatch from the storm above. Mira did not trust that belief, but she could see that it drove him. He had studied the storm charts, the seals, and the old tunnel maps because he feared chaos more than power. Behind them, Counselor Brent remained with the surface guards, trying to keep order in a city that felt ready to break. Brent was an older man with gray hair, round glasses, and a heavy dark coat, and he mattered because he held the last calm voice in the city council. He had sent help below, but he still needed answers, and he still needed Mira to return with something useful. His face had the tired look of a man balancing duty and dread. Mira stepped closer to Victor and kept her voice low. She was a young woman with black hair tied in a simple braid, and she wore a dark blue mage coat with silver trim, fitted gray gloves, a leather belt with small rune pouches, and sturdy black boots. Her calm eyes watched every shadow, and her focused expression hid how hard her heart was beating. She had not always trusted her own judgment, but she had learned that fear could not make choices for her. That was her first change in this part of the story. She no longer wanted to simply follow the strongest voice. She wanted the truth, even if the truth hurt. Victor stopped at a round stone arch carved with old city marks, and he raised one pale hand toward a crack in the wall. The tunnel answered with a low hum. Somewhere ahead, the last hidden key was calling. The sound was small, but it carried weight, as if the entire Undercity had been waiting for someone to hear it. Victor smiled once, thin and sharp, because he knew they were close. Mira saw something else in that smile. She saw hunger, not only for the key, but for the right to decide what Northwatch would become. Before either of them could move again, a faint blue light spread across the tunnel floor, and Nolan rushed in from a side passage with his notes clutched tight. Nolan was a thin man with brown hair, ink-stained sleeves, and a worn scholar coat, and he mattered because he had mapped pieces of the storm pattern that no one else understood. He was nervous, always nervous, but his fear had never made him useless. It had made him careful. He was the kind of man who noticed details other people missed. He swallowed hard and told them that the key was not just a lock piece, but a part of a city seal built to hold back a spirit gate under Northwatch. That was the revelation that changed everything. The storm above was not random at all. Long ago, the city had sealed something beneath itself, and the void storm had started because the seal was failing. Nolan said the key could either mend the seal or break it wide open. Victor listened with cold stillness, and Mira understood at once why he had been willing to risk so much. He believed the city council had hidden the truth from the people, and he wanted the key so no one could ever hide that kind of danger again. Then Nora arrived behind Nalan, moving fast despite her tired face. Nora was a gentle woman with blonde hair in a loose bun, a pale healer robe, and cloth wraps on her arms, and she mattered because she could feel the strain in the underground seal better than anyone. Her voice stayed soft, but her warning was firm. She said the tunnel air was turning unstable, which meant the key was waking up and something on the other side was beginning to notice them. The ground gave a hard shake and dust fell from the ceiling in thin gray sheets. From the next chamber, a cold voice cut through the dark, clear and disciplined like a bell made of ice. General Frost stepped out of the mist. She was a phantom ice general, a female figure with white hair, pale blue glowing skin, and silver armor that looked half solid and half mist. Her expression was cold, but not cruel. She was a guardian bound to the old seal, and she had come because the key had called her by rule, not by choice. She told them that the city was never meant to awaken the gate beneath it. She explained the old bargain in simple words. Northwatch had taken power from a sealed force long ago, and in return the city had promised to keep the gate closed forever. If the promise broke, the storm would widen until it swallowed the walls and turned every bridge and tower into ruin. Mira felt the weight of that truth settle in her chest. This was not just a battle over a missing object. This was a fight over a bargain the city had made before any of them were born. Victor looked at General Frost and did not step back. Instead, he asked the question that had been sitting behind his eyes all along. He wanted to know who made the bargain and why only a blood mage could reach the final lock. General Frost answered with a look that made Mira tense. The city had chosen blood magic as part of the seal because blood carried memory, will, and cost. That meant Victor had not been drawn here by accident. He had been born near the broken edge of the old pact, and the city had been waiting for someone like him to open or repair what had been hidden. That was the second revelation, and it cut even deeper. Victor was not just a thief. He was also a living piece of the seal. Then the last hidden key called again, louder this time, and the wall at the end of the chamber split with a thin line of violet light. Ash stood chained near the far side, and his great body lifted as if the sound had struck him in the chest. Ash was a huge male fire beast with ember red hair like a burning mane, glowing orange eyes, broad muscular arms, scorched markings, and heavy iron chains around his wrists and chest. He looked fierce but also wounded because he had been used as a living lock by the people who built this place. He had been held below Northwatch for years, feeding heat into the old seal so it would not freeze shut. His role mattered because the key could free him or it could bind him deeper. When he saw Mira, his expression changed from raw anger to wary hope. He was not the enemy. He was another prisoner of the city, and that truth made Mira steady herself again. Sergeant Ivy then burst into the chamber with a team of guards behind her. Ivy was a sharp-eyed woman with red hair and a tight ponytail, a steel-gray guard uniform, a utility belt, and polished boots. She moved like someone trained to hold a line no matter how bad the storm looked. She had been sent by Counselor Brent to stop anything from making the city worse, and now she saw Victor, General Frost, Ash, Mira, and the active seal all at once. Her hand went to her weapon, but she did not attack. She demanded a reason. Mira stepped in front of the group and for the first time told the full truth she had learned. She said the city had lied. Victor wanted control because he feared collapse, and the key was the only thing that could either keep Northwatch alive or tear it open. Ivy did not like that answer, but she believed the danger in Mira's eyes. Victor finally spoke without hiding behind charm or silence. He admitted that he had followed the key because his own research showed the storm would grow until the upper towers failed. He also admitted he had planned to claim the key first if no one else could be trusted. That honesty shocked Mira more than any lie could have done. She realized he was dangerous, but he was not simple. He had not come below just to seize power. He had come because he believed a harsh choice was better than waiting for a city to fall apart. Yet belief alone was not enough to make him right. General Frost raised her blade of pale mist and said the final lock would open only if someone gave it a living bond. In plain words, the seal needed a person willing to carry part of the burden inside themselves. Victor looked at Mira and Mira looked back at him. Both of them understood the answer at the same time. Victor had the blood, but Mira had the discipline to protect what came next. Together they stepped toward the wall while Nalan shouted that the chamber was about to collapse and Nora rushed to steady Ash before his chains flared with heat. Ivy ordered her guards to form a barrier. Brent, still far above, would have no idea yet how close they were to disaster. Mira lifted her rune pouches, breathed once, and pressed her gloved hand to the glowing crack. The key began to emerge from the wall like a shard of night wrapped in violet light. The chamber shuddered hard, the spirit gate answered from somewhere below, and Victor whispered that if they failed now, the void storm would break through by dawn. Mira felt the key in her hand, felt its cold pull, and understood that the next choice would not be easy. She had entered the underground with lies behind her. Now she stood at the edge of the truth, with a city above them and a gate below them, and the storm was still calling. Below Northwatch, the air was cold, wet, and tight with fear, while the stone around the hidden chamber trembled like a drum under a stormy sky. Above them, the city still glowed with weak lantern light, but everyone in the underground knew that dawn would change everything if the spirit gate opened the wrong way. Mira stood in the center of that shaking chamber, her black braid resting against the collar of her dark blue mage coat, silver trim catching the violet light from the wall. She held the key in her gloved hand, and the key felt alive, cold, and heavy, as if it wanted to pull her toward the gate below. Around her, Victor Vale watched with pale, guarded eyes, his long black coat marked with faint red ritual lines, and his calm face showed that he understood the danger better than anyone else in the room. Counselor Brent, gray-haired and tired behind round glasses, tried to stand steady near the broken stone arch, because he carried the burden of the city and knew that panic would spread faster than the storm. Sergeant Ivy, with red hair pulled tight into a ponytail and her steel-gray guard uniform set in sharp lines, kept herself between the others and the deeper tunnel, ready to protect them if the chamber gave way. Nolan, thin and nervous, clutched his storm charts and old notes with ink-stained sleeves, because he had spent weeks trying to understand the storm and feared that one mistake would doom the whole plan. Nora, gentle and worn, with blonde hair in a loose bun and a pale healer robe, stayed close to the wounded and kept her hands ready, because she knew fear could break a person as fast as a blade. Far deeper in the underground, Ash the Fire Beast waited in chains, a huge man with ember-red hair like a burning mane and glowing orange eyes, fierce and hurt, because his power might be the only force strong enough to clash with the storm. And somewhere beyond the frost-covered corridors, General Frost, a phantom woman with white hair, pale blue glowing skin, and silver armor that shone half solid and half mist, held to her own cold duty, because she served a strict law older than the city itself. Victor had already said the truth out loud, and the truth was simple and terrible. If they failed before dawn, the void storm would break through the sky and bend the city into ruin. That was why the chamber mattered, why the gate mattered, and why Mira now had to choose whether she trusted Victor, trusted the key, or trusted herself. The wall of dark stone ahead of her was not a wall at all, but a seal made from ancient magic, and the violet light around it kept pulsing like a second heartbeat. Mira could feel the pull of the key growing stronger each time the chamber shook, and she knew that the hidden gate below was answering her in return. Victor stepped closer, slow and careful, and his voice stayed low so the others would not hear every word. He told her that the key was not made to open a door in the normal way, because the spirit gate had been sealed with a promise, and promises could only be broken by someone who accepted the cost. Mira asked him with calm but sharp eyes why he had never said this before, and Victor did not look away. He said he had hidden the full truth because the city would never allow the next step if they knew how much power was buried below Northwatch. He wanted to protect the city, yes, but he also wanted to study the storm before it swallowed the old gates forever. That was the first crack in his story, and Mira saw it at once. He was not only afraid of the storm. He was afraid of losing control of what the storm could become. Counselor Brent heard enough to understand the danger, and he asked Victor the question that had been burning in every mind since the underground began to shake. Was the gate below the chamber a prison, or was it a door for something older than the city? Victor finally answered that it was both. Long ago, the first builders of Northwatch had trapped the storm spirit network beneath the city, hoping to use its power without letting it spread. But the sealing ritual had failed in one place, and that weak point had become the spirit gate they now stood above. The void storm was not a natural storm at all. It was a torn mass of unstable phantom magic, drawn by the gate like hunger drawn to food. If the seal broke without a guide, the storm would rush through the broken sky and flood the city with wild force. If the seal was opened with the key in the right hands, the storm might be redirected, calmed, or locked away again. That was the choice before them, and everyone knew it. But Victor also revealed one more thing, and it changed the room at once. He said the key did not belong to the council and it did not belong to him. It belonged to Mira because she carried the same bloodline as the last gatekeeper, the woman who had hidden the key and then vanished to keep the city safe. Mira stared at him in shock, and the chamber seemed to grow silent even while it shook. She had entered this place with lies behind her, believing she was only a helper with useful magic and sharp instincts. Now she learned that the key in her hand had been waiting for her all along, and that her place in this story had never been random. Mira had no time to sort through all the feelings rising in her chest because the floor gave a hard jolt, and a sharp crack raced through the violet seal on the wall. Sergeant Ivy shouted for everyone to brace, and Nora moved fast to steady Counselor Brent before he lost his footing. Nolan spread his storm charts on a stone ledge and showed how the moving cracks in the sky above had started to match the pulse below, which meant the void storm was growing stronger by the minute. The old notes in his hands were not just charts but records from the first watchmen of Northwatch, and those notes warned that the gate would call for a guardian when the seal began to fail. Mira looked at the notes, then at Victor, then at the heavy dark wall, and she understood that the next choice would not be about power alone. It would be about trust. Victor wanted her to open the seal with the key, but he also wanted to be the one guiding the ritual, because his own forbidden blood magic could shape the storm if it rose too fast. He said that without his help, the gate might open in chaos. Sergeant Ivy did not like him, and she made that clear because her duty was to protect the city, not to trust a man with ritual lines on his coat. Nora asked the simplest question in the room: if Victor touched the gate, would he try to command it instead of save it? Victor did not answer right away, and that silence said more than words could. Then the chamber answered for him. A deep pressure rolled through the stone, and from somewhere below came a low, distant call, like something waking in the dark and learning the shape of a human name. The violet wall brightened, then bent inward, and for one brief moment Mira saw a corridor beyond it, lined with old black stone and broken chains. At the far end of that vision stood a figure in silver mist, cold and upright, and Mira knew it was General Frost. The Phantom General raised one hand, not in welcome but in warning, and the vision vanished as fast as it came. Everyone saw it, everyone understood that the forces beneath Northwatch were not empty. They were watching back. Victor whispered that the general served the old law of the gate, and that if Frost appeared now, then the time for waiting was over. He told Mira that the choice had to be made before the storm found a way through the cracks. Mira closed her fingers around the key, and for the first time since entering the underground, she stopped listening to fear long enough to listen to herself. She remembered the city above, the narrow bridges, the black towers, the market lanterns shining in weak rows, and the people who still believed dawn would bring safety. She remembered the lies that had brought her here and the way Victor had hidden the truth while pretending to help. She also remembered the look in his eyes when he spoke of the storm, because he was not a simple villain and not a simple ally. He was a man who wanted to master danger before danger mastered him, and that made him far more dangerous than someone who only wanted destruction. Mira took one slow step toward the wall, and the chamber answered with a hard rumble. Sergeant Ivy lifted her weapon, ready to protect the group if the seal shattered. Nolan backed away with his notes held tight to his chest, whispering that the pulse was becoming unstable. Nora moved beside Mira, not to stop her but to steady her, because she understood that courage often needed quiet support. Counselor Brent said that whatever Mira chose, the city would live with it, and his steady face showed that he was ready to carry the blame if needed. Then a second pulse crashed through the chamber, much stronger than the first, and the wall split with violet light. From the opening came a cold wind, carrying frost, ash, and the smell of distant lightning. General Frost stepped into view for a single breath, her white hair lifted by the magic around her, silver armor glowing like moonlight on ice. She looked directly at Mira, and her voice rang through the chamber like a command carved into stone. She said the gate would not open for greed, fear, or control. It would only open for the one who accepted the burden of keeping both storm and city apart. Victor went still, because he clearly had not expected that judgment. Mira understood at once that the truth was larger than Victor had told her. The key was not meant to simply unlock the gate. It was meant to choose who would bear its weight. As the chamber shook harder and the void storm thundered above, Mira raised the key toward the seal, and the violet light wrapped around her hand like a living thread. The wall began to split wider, the cold wind grew stronger, and somewhere deep below, ash let out a fierce roar that shook loose dust from the ceiling. Victor reached out not to stop her but to guide the last step, and his face showed fear for the first time. Myra did not know yet whether she could trust him, but she knew the storm was coming, the gate was waking, and the next heartbeat would change everything. Then the key turned on its own, and the hidden door began to open. The chamber flashed white and violet together, and the sound that followed was not a blast, but a huge, deep call from the world below. Stone dust fell from the ceiling in a heavy rain, and the narrow tunnel beyond the seal widened just enough to show a stairway dropping into darkness. The wind that came up the stairway was cold enough to sting, and it carried a strange mixture of frost, smoke, and old magic. Myra kept her stance firm, even as her heart pounded hard, because she now understood that the gate was not simply a doorway. It was a test and perhaps a trap. Victor stepped beside her at last, and he admitted the part of the truth that had been hardest to say. He had come to Northwatch because he knew the storm could be studied, shaped, and maybe used to stop greater ruin elsewhere, but he had also hoped the city would choose him as the one to control it. He had believed that control was the same as safety. Now, with General Frost watching and the gate opening in answer to Myra, he realized that he had been wrong. That was the twist at the center of all his careful plans. The power below was not asking for a master, it was asking for balance. Counselor Brent saw the stairway and finally understood why the old builders had hidden it. It was a path to the oldest chamber under the city, where the storm had first been chained. Sergeant Ivy called for the others to hold the line above ground routes, because if the seal failed more than this, the city might need every guard at once. Nolan gathered his notes with shaking hands and said the old records matched what they were seeing now, which meant the legends were true after all. Nora checked the wounded guard behind them, then looked back with quiet resolve, because she knew the next journey would be darker than the one before it. And Ash, still far below, sent a second roar through the stone, strong enough to suggest that something in the lower chambers had answered the opening gate. Myra felt the key grow warm for the first time, and that warmth told her she had not been chosen to obey Victor, or the Council, or even the old laws alone. She had been chosen to decide what kind of future Northwatch would deserve. So she took a breath, looked once at the people who had followed her this far, and began to descend the stairway into the waking dark, while the void storm still moved above them and dawn still hung just out of reach. The stairway under Northwatch went down in long, narrow turns, and every step carried a cold pulse through the stone. Above, the fractured sky still churned with the void storm, and below, the air felt older, stiller, and full of waiting. Myra led the way with her black braid resting against her dark blue mage coat, her silver trim catching small flashes of pale light from the walls. Behind her came Counselor Brent, the gray-haired leader with round glasses and a worried face, Sergeant Ivy, the red-haired guard with a steel-gray uniform and a hand always near her belt, Nolan, the thin scholar with brown hair and ink-stained sleeves, and Nora, the blonde healer with tired eyes and quiet strength. Each of them had come for a different reason, but they all wanted the same thing now: to stop Victor Vale from using the power under the city to chain Northwatch to his will. He had begun as a forbidden blood mage, hiding behind fine words and careful plans, but his true motive was now clear. He did not want to save the city first. He wanted to control the storm, control the council, and control every frightened person who might resist him. Myra had felt that truth in the warmth of the key, and that warmth had changed her fear into resolve. She was no longer simply a young woman following orders. She was the one the old chamber had chosen to judge what came next. The lower stair opened into a wide chamber shaped like a broken circle, and the walls were covered in black stone lines that glowed faintly with old runes. In the center stood a sealed door made of pale metal and cracked glass, and behind that door was a deep hum that seemed to match the storm above. Nolan stopped first, staring at the markings with open shock, because he had spent months studying storm charts and old records, and he knew what most of them had missed. The city was not sitting above empty ground. It was sitting above a machine of ancient magic, one built to calm a sky broken by old war and old fear. Nora stepped closer beside him, her cloth-wrapped arms trembling a little, because she could feel sickness in the air and understand that this place had hurt people for a long time. Sergeant Ivy kept her strong defensive pose, scanning every shadow with sharp eyes, while Counselor Brent breathed slowly, trying to remain steady for everyone else. Myra reached the door, and the key in her hand grew warmer again, as if it recognized the seal. Then the chamber answered with a low chime, and the pale metal split into lines of light. No one cheered. Instead, a soft wind moved through the room, carrying a whisper that sounded almost like a warning. "Open only for the one who will decide," it said. Myra looked back at the others, and she saw not followers but witnesses. That was when the first twist became clear, because the old power had not been built to obey a ruler at all. It had been built to choose a guardian, and the guardian had to be willing to lose control of the city before she could truly protect it. The key was not a weapon, it was a test. Before Mira could step forward, the chamber lights shivered, and a cold figure formed near the far wall like frost gathering into shape. General Frost appeared there in silver armor that seemed half solid and half mist, her white hair falling around a pale blue face, her expression sharp and disciplined. She was not alive in the usual way, yet she was not mindless either. She had once guarded this place when Northwatch was younger, and now she remained because the seal had tied her to duty long after the world changed. She turned her glowing eyes toward Mira and spoke in a clear, calm voice. Victor Vale had come here before, she said, but he had failed the chamber because he wanted command instead of balance. He had studied the old blood rites, hoping to force the machine to bind the void storm to his own power, but that would only make the storm stronger and trap the city inside a cage of his making. He had already sent hidden marks through the underways, and he was now moving toward the central engine with the hope that fear would do the rest. That was why the council had been shaken, why the guards were strained, and why the city had nearly split apart. He wanted one simple thing, a world where people would have to ask him for safety. General Frost did not soften her warning. If Victor reached the engine first, the chamber would lock down, the storm would twist harder, and Northwatch could be overwhelmed by the unstable magic above it. Mira listened, and she understood something painful. Victor had not been driven mad by power alone. He had been driven by a deep belief that trust always fails and only control survives. That made him dangerous because his fear made perfect sense to him. The far door opened with a slow shudder, and the group moved into a long hall lined with old mirrors of dark glass. In those reflections, the void storm seemed to pass in broken pieces, and for one tense moment, Mira saw a version of Northwatch where the towers had gone silent and the bridges had fallen empty. She almost stopped, but then Nora touched her arm and gave her a small, tired nod. That simple gesture mattered more than any speech, because it reminded Mira that the city was not just stone and law. It was people who stayed when fear told them to run. Deeper in the hall, they found signs of Victor's passage. Dark red ritual lines had been painted on the floor in quick, precise shapes, and several of the old light stones had been drained to ash. Nolan crouched to study them, his hands shaking, and he said Victor was trying to redirect the chamber through blood magic, which meant he was using his own life force to force open gates that should only open by trust and balance. That explained the strange pressure in the air, and it also explained why Victor was willing to take such risks. He believed the storm would destroy Northwatch unless he mastered it first. To him, fear was a reason to seize power. To Mira, fear was a reason to protect others more carefully. Then a heavy sound rolled through the hall and a hidden side door slammed open. Ash came through the smoke that followed, huge and fierce, with ember-red hair like a burning mane, glowing orange eyes, scorched markings on his body, and heavy iron chains around his wrists and chest. He had been kept bound below the city for years, not because he was evil, but because people feared what he might become if the chains failed. His fierce look softened when he saw Mira, and General Frost gave a small, tight bow, because even she respected that Ash had chosen to resist Victor's control instead of serving it. Ash warned them that Victor had taken the route to the engine chamber and had brought a stolen shard of storm glass with him. That shard could help him bend the chamber if he reached the core. The stakes rose again at once. This was no longer only about opening a door. It was about whether a wounded city would be ruled by fear, by old law, or by a young woman brave enough to choose a better path. Mira stepped into the last hall alone, while the others held back at the broken arch behind her, ready to follow when needed. The chamber ahead opened into a vast round space where gears, runes, and black crystal columns rose around a deep pit of moving light. At the far side stood Victor Vale, his long black coat marked with faint red ritual lines, his dark brown hair falling across a guarded face, his pale hands lifted over the engine as if he already owned it. He looked less like a savage villain now and more like a tired man who had spent too long trying to outthink fear. For a moment, he even looked surprised to see Mira come forward with no army and no fear in her posture. He began to speak with careful calm, saying he had done everything for Northwatch, that the council was weak, the guards were slow, and the people would panic unless one firm hand took charge. He said the void storm was not a curse to fight but a force to bind, and that if Mira was wise, she would hand him the key and let him finish what he had started. but Mira now understood the real shape of his motive. Victor had seen chaos, and instead of teaching people to stand through it, he had chosen to build a cage. He wanted safety without trust, order without freedom, and power without honesty. Mira raised the key, and the chamber light wrapped around it like a living thread. Then the warm stone voice returned, speaking not to Victor but to Mira alone. The chamber had chosen a guardian, and a guardian must not seize control. A guardian must share it. Mira finally saw the hidden truth in the runes, and it was the second great revelation of the descent. The engine did not want one ruler to command the storm. It wanted a circle of hands, because the city had been broken by leaders who tried to stand above everyone else. That meant Victor had been wrong from the start, and it also meant Mira could save Northwatch only if she trusted the people who had followed her here. She looked back and she called for Brent, Ivy, Nolan, Nora, and Ash to come forward. Together they stepped into the chamber, and the key warmed in Mira's palm until it matched all of their shared breath. Victor stared at them in stunned silence as the engine lights rose higher, and the storm above the city answered with a violent roar. The chamber had not fully settled, the decision was not yet complete, and the next moment would decide whether Northwatch broke or became something stronger. Mira held her place, heart steady, as the waking dark around her began to move. The chamber of Northwatch glowed with cold light, and the broken sky above the city answered with a deep, restless growl. Black stone walls ringed the room, old runes burned along the floor, and the storm engine at the center throbbed like a giant heart that had just begun to wake. Mira stood near the edge of the circle with her black braid hanging over her dark blue mage coat, and she kept her gray gloved hands tight around the key that had grown warm in her palm. Around her, Counselor Brent watched with a worried face. Sergeant Ivy stood ready with her red hair pulled back tight. Nolan clutched his storm charts with shaking hands. Nora held her healer wraps close, and Ash strained against his chains with embers flickering in his mane. Victor Vale stood opposite them in his long black coat, his dark brown hair falling near his sharp eyes, and he stared at the group with a look that was no longer only anger, but fear mixed with hungry hope. He wanted the engine because he believed Northwatch was already too weak to save itself, and he thought forbidden blood magic was the only force strong enough to bind the city before the void storm tore it apart. That was the real danger, and everyone in the chamber knew it now. If Victor took control, he would turn the city into a cage. If the engine failed, the storm above would crack open the towers and drown the underways in chaos. Mira felt the chamber shift under her boots, and she understood that the choice in front of her was still not finished. The key in her hand pulsed once, then again, as if it was listening to every breath in the room. Nolan looked up from his notes and spoke in a thin, urgent voice, saying the storm charts had changed in the last few seconds, and the central crack above Northwatch was widening faster than any of them had feared. Counselor Brent swallowed hard, then told Mira that the city council had argued for hours about this chamber, this engine, and this old power, but no one had known what it truly needed until now. He had always tried to keep order, yet now he stood like a man who finally understood that order alone could not heal fear. Sergeant Ivy moved one step forward, her polished boots scraping the stone, and she told Victor to back away from the circle and put his hands where everyone could see them. Her voice was hard, but her eyes showed the truth. She was not only guarding the room, she was guarding the last chance the city had to stay united. Victor did not move. His pale hands lifted slowly, and he said he was not there to destroy Northwatch. He said he was there to save it from weakness, from panic, and from the slow collapse that came when people trusted hope more than rules. He admitted something worse, too. He had studied the chamber for years, and he knew the engine could not be guided by force alone. It needed a living bond, a group of minds working together, or it would split and feed the storm instead of resisting it. That was why he had waited for Mira. He needed her key, and he needed her bloodline, because the key did not just open the chamber. It awakened the old promise hidden inside it. At that, the chamber lights flickered and the floor circle brightened in sharp white lines. Mira looked down, and for the first time she noticed the marks carved into the stone. They were not only machine marks. They were names worn down by time, names of the first builders who had sealed the storm engine long ago. Nolan hurried closer, scanned the marks with his notes, and then froze as a terrible understanding spread across his face. He told the room that the engine was never meant to belong to one ruler, one council, or one mage. It had been built as a shared lock, a shared burden, and a shared vow. Long ago, the founders of Northwatch had faced a storm like this one, and they had sealed part of the city itself into the chamber so the engine could draw power from the lives, hopes, and breath of its people. That was the hidden truth. The city was not standing beside the storm engine. The city was part of it. Victor heard this and flinched because it destroyed the story he had built in his own mind. He had thought control would make everything safe, but the chamber only answered to trust. He had wanted power because he had lost faith in people after watching leaders fail, walls crack, and promises break. Years of fear had made him believe that any system without absolute control would fall apart, but the chamber did not care about his fear. It cared about unity. As that truth settled in the room, Ash dragged his chains forward and let out a low, angry rumble. The huge fire beast had been chained and used like a weapon for too long, yet even he could feel the bond in the stone. His orange eyes settled on Mira, and for a brief moment his fierce face softened, as if he understood that she was not trying to command the chamber. She was trying to listen to it. Then, without warning, the shadow around the engine moved again, and a cold voice swept through the dark like frost across glass. General Frost appeared at the far side of the chamber, her white hair bright against her silver armor, her pale blue glow cutting through the haze. She looked half solid and half mist, and her expression carried discipline rather than rage. She was not there by accident. She had come because the storm had pulled old memory out of the void, and she knew the chamber was opening the path to something ancient. She told them the void storm was not a simple weather break. It was a wounded space, a tear where lost power kept trying to return. If the engine was forced to seize that power, the crack above Northwatch would widen and the city could become a doorway for phantom force. Her warning deepened the fear in the room, but it also gave Mira the shape of the truth. This was not a battle of winning or losing. It was a battle of how to hold a broken world together without breaking the people inside it. Mira took a slow breath, and the chamber seemed to breathe with her. She remembered every hard step that had brought her here, every doubt, every failure, and every time she had wanted someone else to choose for her. But no one else could carry this moment. She looked at Victor, and she did not see only a villain anymore. She saw a man trapped by his own need to control what he could not bear to lose. She looked at Brent, Ivy, Nolan, Nora, Ash, and General Frost, and she saw that each of them mattered for a reason. Brent gave wisdom without force. Ivy gave protection without surrender. Nolan gave the truth hidden in old records. Nora gave calm hands and healing care. Ash gave raw strength without lies. Frost gave knowledge of the storm and the cost of ignoring it. Mira understood that the chamber had brought them together because none of them alone could do what the city needed. So she lifted the key higher, and the warm metal glowed brighter in her hand. She told Victor that he was right about one thing. Northwatch could not survive by fear alone, but he was wrong about the rest. Control would not save a city built on broken trust. Only shared strength could do that. Victor's face hardened, then wavered because he heard the truth in her voice. For one long moment, no one moved. Then Victor stepped toward the circle, not to seize it but to test it, and the chamber answered with a rush of dark wind that slammed through the room. The lights surged, the engine roared, and the floor lines burst into a wild pattern that no one could fully read. Sergeant Ivy braced her feet. Nora shouted for everyone to stay low. Nolan almost dropped his charts. Brent reached out as if he could hold the room together with his bare hands. Ash pulled against his chains until the metal screamed, and General Frost raised one glowing hand, ready to freeze the worst of the storm if it broke loose. Mira held her ground at the center, heart pounding as the waking dark turned in the chamber like a living thing. Then, from deep inside the engine, a second voice emerged, soft and old and full of sorrow, and it spoke a name none of them expected. Mira turned at once because that voice sounded like someone who had been waiting inside the chamber for far too long. The chamber stayed still for one sharp moment, and even the storm above seemed to hold its breath. Mira stood in the center of the black floor, her braid tight against her back, while the old voice rose again from inside the engine and called her by name. It was soft, tired, and deeply sad, and it made everyone in the room feel the truth before they understood it. General Frost kept one glowing hand raised, her white hair shining under cold light, ready to freeze the whole chamber if the seal broke. Counselor Brent, with his gray hair and worried eyes behind round glasses, finally spoke the fear he had carried for years. The engine was not only powering Northwatch, it was also holding a person inside it, someone used long ago to bind the void storm and keep the city safe. Victor Vale, the forbidden blood mage with brown hair and a black coat marked by red lines, had learned that secret and wanted the seals broken because he believed no prison should stay hidden forever. Mira looked at Victor, then at Ash, the huge fire beast with ember-red hair and iron chains, and she saw how badly every soul in that chamber had been trapped by old fear. Nora, the blonde healer in pale robes, rushed to Brent and checked his shaking hands, while Sergeant Ivy, with red hair and a steel-gray guard uniform, pulled the last wounded guards behind her shield line. Nolan spread his storm charts on the floor and realized the truth at once. The engine was failing because the buried voice was not a monster. It was the first guardian of Northwatch, sealed inside the machine to keep the sky from tearing open. Victor stepped forward and admitted his motive. His family had been ruined when the council used blood magic to hide the seal, and he had sworn to tear away every lie even if the city suffered. That was the twist Mira had not expected. He was not driven by cruelty. He was driven by grief and rage at a lie that had lasted for generations. Then the void storm cracked wider and the chamber began to shake. Mira made her choice. She told Frost to hold the outer storm, asked Ivy to clear the platform, and placed her hands on the engine with calm, steady care. Instead of destroying the seal, she opened a smaller path and spoke kindly to the voice inside. She promised the Guardian that Northwatch would remember the truth and still choose to live. The old sorrow inside the machine eased, the storm above folded back, and Victor lowered his hands at last. By dawn, the black towers still stood, the bridges still linked the city, and Mira had changed from a cautious mage into a leader who could face fear without turning away.